Welcome to today's Explainer. Get ready because we're about to unpack a truly fascinating, completely expansive cosmological framework. We're diving into a text by an author named Xu Feng, and he lays out nothing less than a 37,000-year chronological roadmap of human evolution. But hey, we're not talking about biology or technology here. This is entirely about the evolution of human psychology and our deep connection to the universe. So grab your focus because we are covering the deep past, the present, and a very specific utopian future. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The source material asks us to completely reimagine the entire span of human existence on Earth. Think about it. Instead of dividing history by, stone ages or industrial revolutions, what if we defined it by our psychological and spiritual states? Well, the author proposes exactly that, segmenting human history into 4 very distinct psychological eras.
Here is how we're going to break this down today. First, the 4 eras of civilization. Second, the universal core, nature. Third, elements of the universe. Fourth, the era of spirituality. And finally, walking the roadmap. All right, starting off with section 1, the 4 eras of civilization and this massive 37,000-year timeline. So the author sets up this sweeping historical timeline that traces our trajectory from the deep ancient past straight through to a proposed post-2013 future. It all kicks off 37,000 years ago with a continent in the Indian Ocean called Lemuria, and this era, it was centered entirely around sensibility. Fast forward to about 10,000 years ago, during the time of Atlantis, where the whole focus shifted over to rationality. Then, over the most recent 10,000 years, humanity has been governed by intellectuality. And finally, according to Xu Feng, humanity actually passed a massive threshold back in 2013, entering what he calls the Lifechanyuan era, a brand new age defined purely by spirituality. Moving right along to section 2, the universal core, nature. We're looking at the true common denominator of human evolution here. Now, what's really interesting about this is that these historical eras aren't just random phases, right? They're connected by a single common denominator. To really grasp this framework, we have to understand exactly how the author defines nature. And he explicitly tells us, don't go looking this up in a standard dictionary. Actually, the author argues that Chinese culture and its characters are divinely created. So we're instructed to understand this concept directly from the divine meaning of the character for nature, which in this specific context means the absolute essence and core of the universe. It's like the underlying thread that dictates everything, from giant cosmic time periods all the way down to the simple, everyday behavior of birds, fish, and us humans. Everything, the author argues, is a literal manifestation of nature. So here is the crucial point. Those 4 eras of civilization we just looked at, they are actually just 4 different ways humanity has learned to interact with this core concept of nature over time. Back during Lemuria, our sensibility meant we merely felt nature. Then in Atlantis, rationality helped us begin to understand and organize it. In our more recent history of intellectuality, we came to truly know nature. But now, in this new spiritual era, the ultimate goal is to approach nature flexibly and dynamically. It's a complete shift in how we interact with the universe. And this brilliantly illustrates how the source connects these esoteric cosmological ideas to established philosophies, specifically Zen Buddhism. By quoting the treatise on the bloodline of the patriarch, the text aligns its definition of nature directly with the concept of Buddha itself. The author points out that Kashyapa and Bodhidharma, key figures in Zen Buddhism, understood this absolute core truth, that practicing Buddhism is simply practicing nature, and seeing one's true nature is the exact path to becoming a Buddha. Pretty profound stuff. Let's move to section 3 and see how this builds. Elements of the universe and the metaphysical mechanics behind it all. So if nature is the core, how exactly does it interact with the rest of existence? Well, the source breaks down the universe into 3 essential elements, mapped out cleanly right here. The first element is consciousness, and its defining characteristic is the Tao. The second element is structure, and its characteristic is nature. And finally, the third element is energy, whose characteristic is love. Because the universe is fundamentally built on these exact 3 pillars, the author instructs followers of Lifechanyuan to practice exactly these 3 things: nature, love, and Tao. It is a highly structured, almost architectural way of viewing universal mechanics. That brings us straight to section 4, the era of spirituality, and what the author calls the second home vision. This highly structured understanding of the universe leads us straight into a very specific utopian vision for the post-2013 world. That time he refers to as the Lifechanyuan era. According to the text, the absolute defining characteristic of this new age is that humans will live like celestial beings. The author describes these new communities, which he calls the second home, as places where there are literally no conflicts, no arguments, and absolutely no deception. People leave their doors unbolted at night, but perhaps the most radical part, the text claims people will no longer live bound by human concepts like morality, ideology, or religion. Instead, they're meant to live entirely in nature, freely blooming their self-nature without ever pursuing the need to possess or control anything. The text draws a really sharp contrast here to hammer its point home. Just look at how the author categorizes those who choose to ignore nature. He says if you cannot feel it, you are ignorant. If you cannot understand it, you are foolish. And if you cannot approach it flexibly, well, you're barbaric. On the flip side, embracing nature is presented as the ultimate key to being totally free, joyful, and content. The text calls this living out the Tathagata nature, which basically means living entirely according to the will of the Creator. To really reinforce this idea of the Tathagata nature, the author turns once again to Zen Buddhism, specifically quoting Huineng, the famous sixth patriarch. This quote emphasizes that our self-nature is originally pure and totally complete all on its own. By relying heavily on this teaching, the author argues that we simply don't need any external rules or rigid societal structures. Basically, everything we could ever possibly need is already completely inseparable from our own inherent nature. And that leads us to our final part today, Section 5, Walking the Roadmap and Achieving the Peak of Life. So, having laid out the history, the mechanics, and this big utopian goal, the author gives us a very specific solution for how to actually achieve this peak of life. But right before giving us the actual steps, the text shares this incredibly vivid metaphor. It says, attempting to transcend nature is as foolish as someone pulling their own hair to lift themselves off the ground. I mean, what an image, right? The author uses this to emphasize just how absolutely futile it is to fight against reality. The claim here is that any spiritual practice that ignores our fundamental nature is really just an illusion. You're just pulling your own hair. So, what exactly is the author's roadmap? Well, he positions himself as a guide for the human spirit and soul and lays out these specific steps. Step 1, treat the guide as a soulmate and communicate openly. Step 2, verify that the guide makes zero demands on you. In fact, the text explicitly says if he has demands, he is a demon. Step 3, completely discard all hypocrisy and falsehood, stripping away all that societal pretense. And Step 4, act purely according to your nature. By following this roadmap, the author guarantees this is the only true way to enter the new spiritual civilization. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. Based on the expansive framework we've explored today, the text really challenges us to examine our own lives. Are you living bound by external ideologies, essentially trying to pull yourself off the ground by your own hair? Or are you genuinely ready to embrace the author's call to act purely according to your nature? It's a completely fascinating lens through which to view human evolution and our place in the universe. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today, and I really hope it sparked some deep curiosity about your own true nature. Catch you next time.